When we engage in the path of self-realization and spirituality, we often acquire notions of things that we should start to do or that we should stop doing in order for our self, our real self, to be realized. This channel is Meditation Amsterdam. My name is Pablo, and today we get to talk about the only sacrifice that really counts when it comes to self-realization. So this one is an interesting topic because so long as we are identified with ego, every single thing that we think or do will be done through our egoic identity. We really have no choice about this. And that's perfectly fine, it's perfectly natural. We've spoken in this channel at length about how the development of our ego is a natural, necessary, and desirable stage in the development of our psyche. So it's perfectly fine, and there's nothing that you can do to, quote unquote, escape that. When we first hear about self-realization and about the possibility of reducing or completely eliminating suffering in our lives, we are inclined to try and achieve and acquire that for the ego so that we don't suffer anymore, that the I or the me is free of suffering. And through reading and practicing, we come to realize that the I or the me is the source of suffering. And we are therefore in a kind of dance with the I, and that dance might last for a while. But especially at the start of the journey, there are practices and observances or austerities that promise to deliver on self-realization. And it's important to understand that many of these practices actually, even when done through the lens or the identity of the ego, do get us closer to self-realization because of what they do to our neurophysiology. I've also spoken in the past about the fact that enlightenment is a psychodynamic or psychosomatic endeavor. Yet we can get lost in the idea that if only we stop doing certain things or deprive ourselves of certain things, that would lead to the goal. So when it comes to stop doing certain things, for example, if we are working say that we're working a corporate job and we start to get into spirituality and we start to subscribe to messages of the kind that you are not meant to be in a corporate prison or an institutionalized type of place, and that you are a free soul. Our mind, our ego, will fabricate this idea that we need to quit our day job in order to become liberated, because so long as we depend on the monthly paycheck, that means that we are curtailing our freedom and preventing our self-realization. And what's interesting is that what's being asked of us is far deeper and trickier than that. We are not being asked to quit our day job. We are being asked to stop identifying with the self that believes that it needs to quit its day job in order to be free. The same would go for all kinds of other austerities. I had somebody in the comments the other day asking me about NoFap. I don't really have an opinion about it. There's different takes on it from a physiological, energetic, psychological perspective, from the perspective of alchemy as well, and transmutation. But regardless, these practices and austerities can do something to strengthen our willpower. In some cases, living a more austere life can be more balanced, right? So they strengthen character. And at the same time, they can make the ego even more institutionalized in our mind, because our sense of doership or as our sense of non-doership or abstaining from doership is still an egoic sense. In other words, there is someone doing the austerity and someone trying to achieve something through the austerity. And what is being required is that we drop that someone-ship, is that we drop the very notion that that there is somebody to achieve something. And that is much more nuanced and much more difficult. It's a real sacrifice to drop, of course, the very sense of self, the self that is doing or not doing an austerity or a practice. What's interesting about it, by that same token, is that if we drop the sense of the one who needs to quit their day job in order to become self-realized, then once that sense is dropped, the day job can be kept or it can be dropped. So it's never really about what you do or don't do. And yet, throughout the path, while we are on egoic mode, it is usually to err on the side of balance, on the side of, if not austerity, at least being non-excessive, both on the side of being too lax and quitting the day job and just doing whatever we want day in and day out, or being completely involved and behind the protective wall or of a relationship or a job or something that keeps us in stasis and that keeps our sense of identity completely ingrained. So it's a very nuanced topic. It's tricky. But what I wanted to convey in this video was this idea that while we are in egoic identity, certain practices will be conducive to increasing willpower, focus, and dislodging the ego just by virtue of bringing it more to the foreground. And yet, in a deeper understanding of things, we come to realize that there is no doing or stopping to do that will liberate, that rather it is a ceasing to identify with the very sense of doership or stopping to do that is behind the activity, that it is that identification and that sense of self that is really at the heart of what we're trying to relinquish through practices that make it more visible, that make it more tangible, that make us able to clearly observe the psychological and emotional ties that we have to our own image of ourselves, our own selfhood, and that through long observation and dissolution of those psychological and emotional ties and memory-based or maybe even physiologically based hooks that the sense of self has on our identity, that we can relinquish the sense of self eventually, regardless of whether we drop certain activities or relationships in our lives or continue to do them, regardless of whether we do certain practices or not. So I hope that invites you to a deeper understanding of what's being asked, and at the same time understand that some of the practices can be continued if they are conducive to that dropping eventually taking place, whilst at the same time understanding that in doing those practices you may be enhancing a sense of doership that eventually will have to be given up at some point. So very curious about your take on the topic and your experiences about it. And as usual, if you believe that this content can be helpful to others, then your liking, sharing, and subscribing makes the channel more available to other people and is very motivating to myself. I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Until then, cheerio. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.